Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross from PTCGRadio, and I'm back with another deck breakdown for you. Only this time, we are back with the deck that won US Nationals this past weekend. And as I happen to know the deck list, I thought, as it's, it's only just happened, some of you are curious about it, so I thought I would show you the deck list and explain some of the choices made. Now, before I show you the deck properly, I must give a shout out to my friend Luke, who runs a fantastic blog, Victory Road, which can be found at victory-road.co, because he has had it confirmed by Brandon Salazar, the US Nationals champion himself, that the deck list was actually taken from the Victory Road blog. So Brandon Salazar may be the person who won US Nationals, but Luke Kirkham of the Victory Road blog is the person that made the deck. Now this deck, unlike things like Flygon Dust Noir, there's no real tricks to this deck. This deck sets up and it hits, and it basically just tries to overwhelm you. And it's quite good with type advantage. So what we see here is our three primary attackers. We've got Landorus, who has Hammerhead for a single fighting energy, does 30 damage to the active and 30 damage to the bench. It does have Land Judgment, which does 80 damage for free energy, or 150 if you're willing to discard all of the fighting energy attached to it, which we may use occasionally, but usually Landorus is going to be used for his first attack to start spreading some early damage. And of course, we've got cards in this deck like Muscle Band, there's 3 of them in the deck, which allows us to hit for an extra 20 damage, meaning it's 50 to the active and 30 to the bench. And we've got cards like Hypnotoxic Laser, which do an extra 30 damage to the active, well, 10 if there is no Burbank City Gym out, but 30 if there is. So you could potentially on turn 1 be doing 80 damage to the active, and you've got a 50% chance of sleep, and that poison damage continues to accrue at the rate of 30 per turn, whilst also doing 30 to the bench, which is phenomenal, especially as nobody's playing Mr. Mime at the moment to block that bench damage. The other single energy attacker we've got is Mewtwo EX, and he's been around for some time. You pop a double colourless energy on him, and he does 20 damage times the amount of energy attached to him and the defending Pokemon, which adds up really, really quickly. Now, you've got to be careful with Mewtwo, because a Mewtwo with a DCE is easily one-hit KO'd by either another Mewtwo with a DCE and a Laser or Muscle Band, or a Deoxys with a Psychic and a Plasma Energy. But if you're not playing against a deck that plays those kind of cards, then Mewtwo can again get hitting very big very quickly. And what really the key to this deck, and the thing that makes this deck really viable at the moment, is Raichu. And it's his first attack we're looking at. 20 damage times the number of your bench Pokemon for a double colourless energy. But crucially, Raichu is a lightning type, and at the moment the format is absolutely overrun with Eviltal decks. And Raichu with a full bench will one-hit KO an Eviltal, or with 8 Pokemon and a laser will 4 Pokemon and a laser will one-hit KO Eviltal, or with 3 bench Pokemon and a Muscle Band and a laser will KO Eviltal. You see where I'm going with this. He's very, very good against Eviltal. Now, we are only running a 2-2 line, and if this were my own deck, I would consider upping that to a 3-3 line. But truth be told, 2-2 is probably enough. What Raichu does a lot of the time is scare people out of using Eviltal. But then again, if they do end up using, their other attackers, which are likely to be things like Absol and Darkrai, in comes Landorus, because they're weak to fighting. Now, rounding off the Pokemon, we've got Druddigon, who again attacks for a single energy, and that's really the point of this deck. You've got attackers which attack for a single energy. Druddigon does 90 damage for a double colourless if your Pokemon was knocked out by damage the previous turn, and that is important. Remember that if the Pokemon was knocked out by poison, this will not activate. Now, this is really good against things like Black Kyurem EX and Rayquaza EX in Blastoise and Rayball decks respectively, but let's face it, they're not seeing a huge amount of play at the moment. You've still got a really good attacker here for 1 energy. It KOs things like Raichu. With a Muscle Band or a Laser, it will KO something like an Absol. With a Muscle Band and a Laser, with a Verbank, it will KO something like a Kyurem in Plasma decks. So again, what we got here is a lovely Pokemon who has his main use against Dragon-type Pokemon, but he has other utility uses. And the other Pokemon we've got, and that's absolutely key to the deck, is Garbodor. Now, we never attack with Garbodor, we can't attack with Garbodor. But what he has is the ability Garbotoxin. You get a Garbodor out, you attach a Pokemon tool to it, and what that means is that there are no other abilities being used. Now, you'll see this deck uses no abilities, but things like Aromatisse decks could potentially avoid one-hit KOs and build up attackers to hit all of our Pokemon for weakness, whilst max potioning themselves. Garbodor stops them doing this. Against decks like Blastoise or Emboar based decks, you can stop their energy acceleration. Against Plasma decks, you can take away their Deoxys, adding damage, or their Red Signal. And there's a bunch of really weird decks, like if you come across something like Ninetales and Moongus, Garbodor could end up ruining them before you even really get started. Garbodor has its main uses against decks like, it's really good against Plasma and Blastoise and Aromatisse, but it's one of those weird little cards that can really help against anything. Well, anything with abilities. And if we look at this deck, we don't need abilities at all, so there's absolutely no downside. Although I would mention, of course, that when you get Garbodor, it's got a very hefty retreat cost. Don't leave yourself in a position where you've got no Floatstone and no Switch and Garbodor stuck active. I've seen a lot of games won and lost in that very nature. So kind of like I said with Dusknoir in my Flygon Dusknoir deck analysis. So, that's what we've got there. Now, in terms of consistency, this deck is slightly down on what I would usually like, but it won US Nationals, so maybe it's probably consistent enough. We've got 4 Juniper, that's fairly standard, best draw supporter in the format. We've actually dropped down to 3 N in this deck, and that is very simply because this deck aims to take a lead. N is really good draw early game, and it's really good for if your opponent takes an early lead. And that is why the vast majority of decks in the format play 4N. But this deck is always aiming to take an early lead. You expect to be going ahead, and for that reason, you don't want to be playing 4N. And that also explains why there's a Shauna in the deck. Shauna is not a particularly great supporter most of the time, but if you go down to 2-3 prizes left, Shauna's going to be better than N. You don't want to be ending yourself to 3 and your opponent to 6, and that's where Shauna comes in. Skylar, 3 copies of this. 4 is probably a bit excessive, but as you'll see in a minute, there's a load of cards that trainer cards that we really don't, we don't want to play too many, but we want to use them. Skylar helps us get them out. That is a total of 10 supporters, which is a little bit low. Sorry, 11 supporters, which is slightly lower than I'd like. But we've also got 2 Bicycle here. Now, again, because this deck takes such good early leads, that makes Bicycle even better. Because a lot of the time, we're going to be end to low hands, and Bicycle is going to be able to draw us a bunch of cards, hopefully then drawing us into a supporter to draw even more cards. Bicycle, this is exactly the kind of deck Bicycle is good in, along with something like Plasma. And finally, Computer Search. There are 3 really good reasons we're playing Computer Search in this deck. Number 1, the supporters are not quite as numerous as we'd like, 11 supporters, 2 bike. Computer Search gives us an out on turn 1, or very early game. Number 2, double colourless energy. It searches for a double colourless energy. We need it for Mewtwo, we need it for Raichu, it's absolutely key. Number 3, we are going for a speed deck. Now, Dowsing Machine to get one of these trainers back would not be a terrible play in a deck like this, but we want to be going off turn 1. If we've got a Landorus active and a Fighting Energy, maybe we want a Muscle Band, or we've got a Laser but we need a Verbank. Or maybe we've got a Mewtwo, so we're going to want a DCE. Or maybe we've got the DCE, but we want a Muscle Band or a Laser. Maybe we're up against a deck which relies upon ability, so we want to get our Garbodor out as soon as we possibly can. And so on and so forth. Computer Search here is the optimal supporter. We've also got something lovely which can be searched by Computer Search, and that is Lysandre. Another reason why we would play some Bike is so that late game we can try and use Bike to search for Lysandre. Lysandre here is really good because it allows us to target the bench. We've got Pokemon that hit for weakness. We've got Raichu to hit Yveltal, and being able to grab up an Yveltal with a bunch of energy on and kill it is a huge advantage. The other thing is, we do run the risk in this deck of taking 4 or 5 prizes, getting end to low hand and drawing dead, and the Sword allows us to take that last prize or two far more easily than we could otherwise. So that's very good in that respect. In terms of other trainer cards here, we've got a single Enhanced Hammer. Now, Enhanced Hammer isn't going to do wonders all of the time, but what it is going to do is slow some decks down just a little bit. If I'm playing against a Plasma deck, maybe there's a Kyurem there, and I don't mind a Frost Spear because that's not going to kill my Landorus. What I really don't want is a Blizzard Burn to one-hit KO my Landorus. So in comes Enhanced Hammer. Or a Raichu deck can be screwed over with this, or a Mewtwo, or even just taking off one double colourless against Darkrai Yveltal. It's not a card that's going to absolutely dominate matchups for you, but it is a card that dropped at the right time could be an absolute asset. Speaking of at the right time, Bicycle. Something I meant to say a second ago with Bicycle. Bicycle should not be played to get one extra card, unless if you really need a Muscle Band or a Laser to knock out a key Pokemon, then yes. But generally, Bicycle should be saved for when you really need it. When you're end to 2, that's when you want your Bicycles in the deck. I regularly play against people online who will go Bicycle for 1, Bicycle for 1. I've seen people Bicycle for 1 4 times in a row. And that's ridiculous, because if you get end late game, you're going to want those Bicycles back. Same thing with Enhanced Hammer. Don't just play Enhanced Hammer because you've got it. Wait until you can stop an opponent Blizzard Burning the following turn. Or wait until you can knock out an Yveltal in the same turn as knocking a double colourless off the bench to Yveltal to really run them out of options. If you just play Enhanced Hammer when you draw it, you might do some good. But if you save Enhanced Hammer, you can pull off these awesome plays that really screw your opponent over. In terms of the ball engine, we've got 3 Ultra Ball, 1 Level Ball. The standard is 4 Ultra Ball, but we've got Trubbish, Pikachu and Raichu that can be gained with Level Ball. Given how prevalent Yveltal is, that's why you need the Level Ball here, so you can get that Raichu out as soon as you possibly can against Yveltal. It helps to set up Garbodor slightly quicker in some matchups, but generally the Level Ball's there to help you get your Raichus nice and early. What you don't want is your Pikachus being picked off so that your opponent can knock out a win. The other cards, we've got 2 Floatstone. I know the counts down the bottom here do disappear, but we've got 2 Verbank, 2 Floatstone, 3 Muscle Band, 7 Fighting, 4 double colourless. We've got 2 Floatstone, just because Garbodor is very, very good, but it's got a big retreat cost. So when you've got Garbodor out, really your priority wants to be getting Garbodor out with a Floatstone. That's absolutely key. You have to play them down carefully so they don't run out. In terms of Muscle Band, that's an Excelgor, sorry, clicked the wrong thing. In terms of Muscle Band, the reason we've got 3 of them is because we can't really find room for a 4th. But Muscle Band is absolutely key. It adds 20 damage, and as I've said, we're going for fast attackers, single energy attachments, early wins, early pressure. Muscle Band is key for that, and if you could find room, a 4th would be very good in this particular deck. 7 Fighting is fairly standard, to be honest. It allows you to almost always have one turn 1, and we've got a single Professor's Letter there. The reason that's a Professor's Letter rather than an 8th Fighting Energy is because we have Skylar, and Skylar allows us to search for Professor's Letter. Nice and simple. 4 double colourless, it's amazing. If we could play more, believe me, we would. 4-2 Laser and Verbank is again standard. Laser's too good not to play 4 of. You might be able to cut down to 1 Verbank City Gym because the games where it's most useful against things like Plasma and Yveltal, they're going to probably put 1 in play anyway. But if you only play 1, it can be a real pain to draw into and it could be prized. You've got Skylar, but still playing 2 is the safer play here. And I believe the only card I've not mentioned now is Switch. The reason we play 2 Switch is because Garbodor and Landorus both have heavy retreat costs, and Landorus especially is very susceptible to Hypnotoxic Laser. Even if you're not put asleep, you still accrue laser damage very, very quickly. So the reason that we play 2 Switch there is to get it out of the active. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the deck. I would consider making a couple changes here. I'd like a couple more supporters. I'd maybe cut a Verbank City Gym. I would also feel a bit better with another switch or maybe an escape rope or two. I would also probably cut down the enhanced hammer and try and thicken up the Raichu line. I've also spoken to Luke, the creator of this deck, since, and he said that the Druddigan isn't that useful and he'd consider dropping it. But they're all niggly little things. I honestly haven't tested this particular build of the deck, although this is very similar to decks I've been playing all season. But I think we should trust Luke and Brandon in their particular counts of these cards here. As always, if there's anything you wish to know or any questions you've got, comments to make, stick them in the comments down below. And make sure you like this video and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.